What will it take to rebuild Syria? Just over a week since the fall of the Assad regime, hope still prevails. But reality is also setting in, with thousands of homes and infrastructure destroyed, an economy in ruins, and a government leader still listed as a terrorist. Can Syria maintain enough stability to put a broken country back together? And who should help? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is Syria. "14 years of brutal war have left Syria a shadow of its former self. It was already a poor country in 2011, but over the course of the conflict, Syrians have faced massive psychological trauma alongside an economy that's shrunk around 85%. State coffers are virtually empty, and more than 2/3 of the population is in need of aid. And now, Syria is under the command of leaders designated as terrorists by powerful countries, which means they're banned from legal trade and assistance unless that designation is lifted. So what state is Syria really in, with so much infrastructure destroyed, civic institutions in shambles, and an untested de facto government? Here's a look.
As the dust slowly settles in Syria, the horror and destruction wrought by the Bashar al-Assad regime are being exposed. Rescuers dig mass graves while many are searching for their loved ones. Some have flocked to the regime's notorious prisons to find the missing. Others are examining bodies in hospital morgues. And when these displaced Syrians returned to their neighborhood in the western city of Homs, they found their homes reduced to rubble.
There is no electricity, water, windows, or doors. There is no work. I'm confused about where I will live. Should I return to the camp? I really don't want to.
Those who fled Syria years ago have similar questions. Thousands of refugees have crossed into Syria from bordering countries, but many are finding it impossible.
We would love to return, but right now we don't have a house there. There is no money to live there, and we need money, and we want something to go with to Syria.
Solving these problems requires immense planning and rebuilding, and it will be expensive. A 2021 estimate puts the cost at $250 billion. The new government says they are determined to revive the country and urged the international community to lift the sanctions put in place during Assad's rule. UN envoy Geir Pedersen visited Damascus to meet with the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, formerly known as Mohammed al-Julani. He said he hopes to bring an end to the sanctions quickly and to review removing the terrorist designation of the HTS. Meanwhile, the UN's aid chief plans an ambitious boost in humanitarian assistance.
Much depends on the conversations we have with the authorities here. Much depends on whether we can secure the funding that we need from the international community. But we're ready to go big. This is a moment where we all have to rally around behind the Syrian people and to support them to rebuild security, justice, opportunity, and the country that they deserve.
Rights groups have stressed the importance of preserving prison records to deliver justice. Fadl Abdul Ghahani, head of the Syrian Network for Human Rights, said those are crucial to identify the victims and the perpetrators. And as the opposition forces emptied prisons, he also has other worries.
The random release of detainees without thorough review of their files could result in the release of individuals involved in crimes, causing additional harm to victims and their families.
The destruction in Syria has not ended with the fall of Assad. Israeli forces have entered the UN-monitored buffer zone in the Golan Heights and approved a plan to expand settlements in the occupied territory. It has also pounded Syria with hundreds of airstrikes, hitting the country's navy, air bases, arms depots, and other military equipment. The country's new rulers are facing a balancing act with international powers as they promise to rebuild Syria for all Syrians.
So what will it take to rebuild Syria? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Oman, senior fellow at the Omran Center for Strategic Studies and former spokesperson for the president of the Syrian interim government, Yaser Tabbara. From South Carolina, retired U.S. Army colonel and head of research at the Foreign Policy Research Institute's Eurasia program, Robert Hamilton. And Onur Erim, is a Turkish domestic and foreign policy analyst. Thanks all so much for being with me. Yaser, I have to start with you. As a Syrian who's now spent so much of your life fighting for change in your home country, and now to finally see it in this form, is it what you expected and what you wanted?
It's, well, thank you for having me on the show. I mean, as a Syrian, obviously, a sense of elation, relief, cautious excitement all at once. Is it what we expected? I don't think it's what anybody expected. I think this was a surprise to a lot of us, if not all of us. Is it what the Syrian people has been working towards, or a good portion of the Syrian people have been working for over the past at least 14 years, if not more? Absolutely. I mean, this is an outcome that we all, I think, could agree that brought a great deal of relief to a country that has suffered for way too long, almost 5 decades or over 5 decades of a systematic destruction of its state institutions, of its social fabric, and of anything that resembles a positive role that it could play regionally and internationally. No, it's what not.
Yeah, no, I was going to. I mean, your primary objective was achieved, but do you believe, for example, your former government colleagues, from the former opposition interim government, are looking forward to, or would even be willing, really, to work with the now de facto government that's taken over?
Well, first of all, this didn't, the fall of the Assad regime did not completely sum what we've been working on and our ultimate goal. Our ultimate goal was always to regain agency and regain ownership of rebuilding the Syrian state. And so the departure of the Assad regime and its fall was a prerequisite for that as a first step. The road is very long ahead, and there's much still to be seen. What we've seen is a number of different signals. Some are encouraging, some not so much. But considering that this has taken place, less than 2 weeks ago, there's still a great deal of, again, cautious optimism. Syrian civil society, Syrian humanitarian society, the groups that have been building capacity over the past 14 years, who never had the chance to do that, who have developed governance experience in all sorts of different areas of Syria and territories of Syria, are ready to engage. And they're going to continue to push for the ultimate goal of creating actual change and rebuilding the Syrian state.
Yeah. Yaser, one more question for you before I broaden out this discussion here. As a Syrian, knowing your people, recovering from the trauma of war, the tens of thousands who were tortured in the prisons we've seen, those who survived Daesh, are Syrians able and ready, do you think, in a particular way, knowing the strength of your people, to rebuild a country after that kind of emotional trauma, and remembering those who might be so damaged that they want to seek revenge? Do you think Syria is in a particular position of strength to deal with all of this?
The answer is an unequivocal, absolutely yes. As you said, the resilience is unmatched. The types of initiatives that we've seen immediately after the fall of the regime, people taking control of their own neighborhoods and in a very positive way, relaunching initiatives. The Syrian expatriates that have been on the sidelines waiting for this moment to repatriate and reverse the brain drain that has taken place over decades, to organize their wealth and to pour it back into the country. I think all of these are strong testaments that the sacrifices of those who've been killed, those who've been tortured to death, those who've been disappeared, those who have been displaced will finally mean something. And I think Syrians would rely on that momentum and on that pain to fuel their will and their resilience, and to rebuild this country, and to not allow anyone to go back to the era of Assad and the authoritarian one-party dictatorship that has destroyed the Syrian people and Syrian societies and the Syrian state.
Okay. Robert Hamilton, I'm going to ask you a complex question, but very simply phrased. What needs to happen for this to go well?
Well, that is a complex question, but I think it's an important one. So thanks, Andrea, for allowing me to be with you today. I think two things have to happen for things to go well. And one of them is that the new Syrian government has to prove it can run a country. It's got internal challenges. It spent HTS, at least, the opposition group, and the opposition group that led the military operation that overthrew Assad, spent most of its time as a military organization and has only recently started to do some of the sort of basic civil and governance services that are going to be required to run the country. So there's that. Can it run a country? The other internal challenge it faces is the fact that it doesn't control all of the country. About a third of Syria, everything north and east of the Euphrates River, is under control of the Syrian Democratic Forces, which are a Kurdish Arab coalition backed by the United States. So it has to come to some sort of condominium with the SDF and figure out what the structure of Syria internally looks like in order for it to be able to even, for us to see if it can govern the country. And then the second thing is it's faced with a lot of challenges posed by external actors. So it's got the Russian bases that it still has to decide or figure out in some sort of negotiation with the Russians that's been going on, what the status of Russia's bases in Syria is. Moscow will want to keep them. The Kremlin will want to keep them because they're critical to Russia's ability to project power in the Eastern Mediterranean and Africa. It would be very understandable if the new Syrian government wanted them out because the Russian military spent 9.
Before you go too far, because I do want to talk about the interests of foreign powers involved in Syria, but let me ask you very quickly, Robert. I mean, if we look at Idlib, for example, a region that has been administered by so-called rebels for some time now, do you think it's a decent example of how Syria could be going forward? You say they have no real experience, but they have to some extent in the region of Idlib.
Yeah, they were able to provide services in Idlib for essentially Idlib was a problem created by the Russians and the Assad regime where they were pushing all the opposition groups in places that the Russians and the Assad regime conquered into Idlib. And I think it is instructive that all these different groups, various factions, various groups, various external backers managed to coexist in Idlib. So yeah, I think Idlib in a perfect world may be a microcosm of what could happen in Syria more generally, but it'll take a lot of luck and a lot of patience and a lot of good decisions on the part of not only the new government, but all the other political and military actors in the country.
Okay, Onur, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that analysis there, particularly about Idlib. This is, of course, all happening on Turkey's borders. Again, millions of refugees looking at options now to return. So what is Ankara's view and strategy here going forward?
First, I think it is very important to point out, I think every time that the subject is arised, we're talking about, what, almost 5-6 decades of Assad family regime in Syria. That only leaves about 3 to 4% of the current Syrian population that has never seen anything but the Assad family regime. This fact will actually house many problems today and tomorrow for things to get moving in Syria. It's not going to be easy. I think we could all agree that the next stage in rebuilding Syria will be full of many challenges in many different aspects. So it's not going to be easy. I think Turkey's perspective from day one, whether it's Idlib, whether it's anywhere else in Syria, has been very straightforward. Turkey has never tried to Syria or anywhere else, export democracy. figure out new ways to, divide a country, whether through cultural differences or religious differences. I think what Turkey will be doing, as she has been doing thus far, is trying to make sure that rebuilding Syria, where everyone's voices are heard, everyone's voices do matter, and that the country will reach a level of prosperity for at least its citizens to be able to, have a roof over their head, and have a decent meal to eat, and a somewhat decent schools to go to, and somewhat health system to take care of its people. I think Turkey approaches this from a number of different perspectives, but in this situation, Turkey's role, responsibility, and stakes are the highest, because it is our neighbor, and it will be till the end of time, which means if there's problems there, it will definitely affect us, as it has with the millions of refugees that Turkey has been housing over the past 10, 12 years. So I think Turkey's mind is set trying to rebuild Syria, but by Syrians, not by influencing them or forcing them into something that they are not.
Okay.
Is this going to be easy? No, because as I said, we're talking about 5 to 6 decades of Assad family regime, where only 4 or maybe 3% of the population knows something aside from this regime.
Right. Okay, let me come back to Yaser at this point. I want to look a little bit closer at what is happening within Syria, because now we have Ahmed al-Shara, the de facto leader. He's telling minorities now, both at home and abroad, that all Syrians will be protected. He said, in fact, all rebel factions will be disbanded, and, the fighters trained instead to join the ranks of the defense ministry. That sounds ideal, everyone working together in the defense of the sole country. Is he to be believed? And do you think it's genuinely possible?
Well, yes, because I think it's directly in his own interest to consolidate as much as possible any of the potential elements that can instigate violence or instigate instability. I think now his challenge as a transitionary, or hopefully head of state, is to ensure as a number one priority that the security of all Syrians is guaranteed. I think one of the main factors that has caused the destabilization of the Syrian state is the fact that it just was allowing way too many foreign and domestic actors to roam free. Some willingly, some against its will. But I think that is the new sort of logic that will have to be implemented by Shara and his government and his appointed government. That the states naturally has to monopolize violence, and it has to bring all factions together. And I think they have demonstrated record of doing that in Idlib. And going back to your earlier question, yes, I mean, I think there are qualitative and quantitative differences in terms of governance, the governance of Idlib, both on a security point of view and from basic administrative services point of view. But if you look at Idlib and compare it to other areas under the Syrian map over the past, let's say, 4 or 5 years, you'll see that it was potentially the most livable from a services point of view, from a security point of view, area in all of Syrian territory. And a lot of people would make that argument. And so I think they're trying to, transition or transmit that experience into, all of Syria. And that's obviously an extreme challenge, but so far, if anybody can meet that challenge, I think it would be Shara and HTS.
It is very encouraging to hear that. Yaser, I just have a quick kind of detailed question to ask you, because that personally I've been very curious about. We've been seeing so much celebration around, for example, so many thousands of people being released from Syria's prisons. I have to question that because it's not just political prisoners that are in a lot of those prisons, and they've been entirely opened. Do you fear what the fabric of that newly released population really entails? Do you think that could be a destabilizing factor in Syria going forward, or do you think really just the vast majority were political prisoners and the rest can be dealt with by police and security forces that are there?
It's still to be seen what the actual percentage and statistic in terms of political prisoners versus otherwise. I mean, what we've seen, what we know is that there were tens of thousands, if not in the above the 100,000 number in terms of political detainees, and unfortunately the majority of them have been murdered in cold blood and under torture and other methods of extermination by the Assad regime, which we will, as a Syrian people, make sure to hold them fully accountable for. Now, look, there are a lot of concerns that we have.
Right.
There's a very robust debate that is taking place, that have been taking place since day zero, since December 8th, on the challenges and on the behaviors of this the power in Damascus. And there has been a lot of pushback, and there has been a lot of questions put on the table, and that's going to be the nature of this upcoming period, where we will continue to ask the right questions and hope to get the right answers and push for the right behavior by those in control.
It is going to be a process, to say the least. Robert Hamilton, let me come back to you. To really be able to work effectively, though, going forward, this de facto government, HTS and Ahmed al-Sharaa will have to really lose that terrorist designation. Do you think they will? And then from that point forward, then you can look at the competition that's going to arise between foreign powers, not least Russia, as you mentioned, Iran, as well as what Israel even wants in the Golan Heights. There's a war brewing there.
Yeah, and so, of course, whether Jelani and HTS lose the terrorist designation is dependent upon outside actors. It's dependent upon largely the U.S. and the EU, which are, the two biggest sort of political actors that have designated them a terrorist organization, and there's still a bounty on his head from the U.S. And so I think certainly there will be discussions between the EU, the U.S., and the new Syrian government. The EU, to my understanding, has already laid conditions down that say future EU aid to the new Syrian government is dependent upon the Syrian government closing the Russian bases. So that complicates it even further, because then you not only have the terrorist question, but you've got the question of what external actors are present in Syria. So those are things that, for the government to succeed, I think external aid is going to be important, especially from big countries like the U.S. or big actors like the EU. And so there will probably have to be some restitution made, or some discussions that lead to an agreement on restitution for past behavior and promises of future behavior on the part of HTS and maybe Jelani himself, the new Syrian government, in terms of its support for terrorism.
Okay, Onur, if you have some thoughts on that, go ahead. But I also wanted to ask you specifically, Turkey's position looking at what is happening in the Golan Heights and the fact that Israel is moving in somewhat aggressively right now because attention is turned away. This is particularly an area that is of concern to the new leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, because this is where he is from. Where do you see that going as far as a strategy in maintaining security and territorial integrity of Syria?
Let me just briefly address the terrorist, label. Unfortunately, we live in a world where terrorists are, not labeled or not portrayed due to the acts of terrorism they show, but rather due to certain countries labeling a person as a terrorist or not. As a matter of fact, some of those countries, they change their stand on people or organizations, whether they're terrorists or not, depending on their own politics or international diplomacy. So that being said, if we're talking about justified labels, then we just need to look at the person's acts, whether they fall in line with acts of terrorism or not. Going back to your other question, I think when you started the question where you said that there's something brewing there, I think that's the exact word that I would have been looking for. There's something definitely brewing in Golan Heights, and which is where Golan is from, obviously. The thing is, I don't know there's a easy way or a safe way to get out of this. Unfortunately, any kind of a clash in and around Golan Heights, regarding Golan Heights, will not be easily resolved. And unfortunately, there's a big chance that it would be very messy and very bloody. And I hope it doesn't get to that stage.
Yeah, let me ask Robert Hamilton then very quickly for final thoughts there. Onur says there's potentially no easy or safe way to get out of this and what's brewing in the Golan Heights. Would you agree there? And where would the U.S. actually stand on Israel further occupying land in Syria while it's in such a vulnerable state?
I agree that there's no easy way out of this. Trying to predict the U.S. reaction to an expanded Israeli incursion into the Golan Heights is difficult because we're at an inflection point between administrations. And I think all you can say is the current administration, the Biden administration, although I think the global view is it's been pretty soft on Syria, soft on Israel, has been much harder on Israel than an incoming Trump administration will be.
Okay. That will have to be the final word then for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank sincerely all three of my panelists so much for being with me. Our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.